This is Sessions with Sara Cate and Ashley, a podcast that explores the feelings, emotions, and experiences of what it means to be human in this world. This podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not meant to replace therapeutic services of any kind. Please refer to the list of references if you need support.
And before you dive in, please like, subscribe, comment, share with anyone you think might also connect with today's session. Our goal is to reach as many people as possible, and we are endlessly grateful for your continued support. So, let's get to it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sessions with Sara Cate and Ashley. I am Sara Cate.
I'm Ashley.
And Ashley is going to let us know today about what are we talking about, Ash?
You know, something really simple. Something
like
today we are going to talk about ancestral and generational trauma. Yeah, I mean, you know, nothing big.
It's a deep one.
And also wisdom, and also compassion, and also understanding, and also bringing it back to your body, because who would we be if
we didn't
have that as a goal?
Yes.
And so, you know, I think where I want to start this is because sometimes it's helpful to orient yourself to facts. And so I want to just maybe start this coming from more of a scientific lens of the fact that there are now multiple studies. There used to be just one major one that they did with survivors of the Holocaust. And what they looked at was DNA changes, and they found it for 4 generations after Holocaust survivors that their DNA was changed. Now, we could go into this even deeper because we can't really talk about that without then also talking about nature nurture. Nurture truly plays a significant role. And so what they found was that the people who had survived this like horrific trauma, their offspring and so forth for 4 generations, their genes and how they responded to things in their life was changed such that you could see the changes when you looked at their DNA. And I think that maybe I feel like that is so important because I have heard, and I think it's changing, right? I think that we're getting better, but I have heard many people talk about how this is maybe not a real thing, or maybe they don't want to believe in it. Maybe they want to just tell people that if they work hard, they'll be okay, or that what your parents went through and grandparents and all the way up, that it doesn't really matter as long as you're a good person and you work hard. And I get so irritated when I hear that. Yeah, I get really irritated.
I'm curious. Like, I'm curious why is that irritating to you?
Yeah, good question, Sara Cate. I guess because when you think of the things that this is how my brain works. When I think of the things that people have been through, and not just them, but their families and the generations previous to them, and how extremely different they are than others, like myself, right? Like, yeah, every generation has issues, right? Like, we all have struggle in our life. We are human. However, my family history is nothing like those of some of my friends. And when you think about the privileges that I was awarded, just because of where I came from, just because of the color of my skin and my hair and my eyes, just because of that, I am starting life so much further forward because I have this background to back me up, right? So even if I, quote, am a hard worker and I like really want to be successful, I already have success behind me.
And right. And what you're even saying is like physiologically, like your actual physical system supports because it doesn't have the imprint of these stressors and these markers of,
You know, and I think about I am carrying in my ovaries, I am carrying my grandchild's DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And that like is also, I think, maybe one of those like just facts about biology that is fascinating that maybe people don't give credit to, but like that
Right.
is how fucking amazing our bodies are. In my ovaries right now are my grandkids, if I have kids and then they have kids, right? But they're within me right
Mm-hmm.
now. So
So they're getting
everything
her lived experience.
everything that I experience is
Mhm.
getting imprinted on them. Now, when you come from a privileged place, again, I'm not experiencing the trauma that somebody who has really been through their families and just because of who they are, what their religion is, what their skin color is. When
Mhm.
you think about the impact of what they're having on their grandkids, the stakes are a little bit higher.
Right, and I think it's easy for us to talk about this in terms of like physical health because
Mm.
we love the hard sciences as Western individuals. We love things that we can measure and we love things that we can see. And so what she's talking about is like, looking at the actual physical implications of this. And that's what people are finally starting to study and
Mhm.
recognize that, like, because when Ashley's saying she's kind of even further ahead externally, yes, because of the color of our skin, color of our eyes, both of us, obviously being white women with blue eyes and blonde hair, we have lived a certain life that has given us certain things. And so we have not these expression in our genes while we have our own anxieties and all of those things. We will not have the similar expressions of that the natives to this Northern America experienced when they were pushed off of their land, right? Like we don't have those kinds of hardships and experiences built down into our DNA. So our health is going to look different, like
Mhm.
and for generations, right? What does heart disease look like for white Eastern European women? Like what does all of these different things that start to show up over time in our bodies is going to look different. Um, and we see this with the A score that we were talking about,
Mhm.
having adverse childhood experiences, the higher likely you are for heart disease, the higher likely you are to have high cholesterol. All of these different things show up in our bodies if these lived experiences as a child happened. And then it increases the possibility of that. And then we think about this generationally and intergenerationally, right? Like
Mhm.
we think about this for decades and decades and decades and decades before we lived, right? But then, we have to, and so when Ashley and I were deciding kind of how to talk about this, we were really sitting with creating space between generational trauma and kind of our own lived day-to-day experience with our caregivers in our physical existence right now, right? And like both deserve to have a part of this conversation because it can be hard sometimes to discern. And the language that I use around this is what feels like mine and what
Mhm.
doesn't feel like mine.
Mhm.
What my grandmother, so Ashley was saying, we were in our grandmother's bodies essentially. And, what my grandmother lived was pretty horrific. Her trauma history is extensive and it was complex over years. And I didn't live that same life, but I have really interesting anxieties around and fears around things that my grandmother did experience in her life that were not even necessarily told to me when I was young. I wouldn't have been able to, it was not age appropriate for me to know what she had been through. But as this adult person, as I found out more, and as I've done my own work somatically to understand what's
Mhm.
showing up in my body, I am able to start to differentiate between what feels like my historical generational trauma and the anxieties that come from that and the fears that come from that and the worries and the stories, even the narratives, and what actually feels like mine, Sarah's,
Mhm.
today in
Mhm.
2024, right?
Yeah, I think maybe it's helpful to pause here for a sec and the whole I mean, we with this podcast, we want to provide resource, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're coming from a place of both, again, like our experiences and also the work we do with clients and the work that we've done ourselves and through all of this, right? And so I think, especially thinking about something like this, it's really big. It's really can be really heavy. And I just want to acknowledge that many of us were never, if not the majority of us on this planet, really, were never taught how to even contemplate that we could be carrying things from the previous generations. And so if this feels like holy,
an iceberg,
what are you guys even talking about? We recognize that. And the iceberg is not meant to be blown up today.
No.
The iceberg is the iceberg is just meant to be noticed, to just maybe find a little curiosity. Maybe you want to explore this. Maybe it feels like too much right now. Awesome. That's okay. But now right? Like now you know that it's out there. You know that there are resources for you. You know that there are ways
conversations about this.
Yes. You know that there are ways that you can move through this in a supported fashion, not that you have to sit at home and do all of this on your own. But we feel very strongly on having conversations that aren't typically had. And here we are. That's why we're talking about this.
And to Ashley's point, what she said very early on, like about the compassionate piece, right? Like to recognize that, like, all of our lived histories, whoever you are, wherever you are sitting, whatever you have been through, whatever your family has been through, and whatever the generations and ancestors that came before you have been through, right? Like to think about that as a collective experience, like Ashley was saying, is overwhelming. And so and it can also, though, help us recognize that that is overwhelming.
Yes.
And so that makes living life already in our day-to-day society that is very difficult sometimes to navigate. That compounded with all of that really begs for then a compassionate lens with which to view each other and ourselves. Because diving into this, doing our kind of like, I don't know, a lot of American schools, you had to do like a genogram or like a family history, right? Like where you had to like map out your family tree, essentially. Like when you start doing that, you start recognizing what lived experiences the people that came before you had, right? Ours was wars and the Great Depression and, immigration to the United States, all of these things. And the people of this land, were moved and abused, and the people that were brought here, as slaves, like everybody has these lived experiences flowing into their DNA today. And we're all trying to survive it. We're all trying to live in this life and make sense of ourselves in this world, in this day and age that's rapidly changing. And to then historically recognize what lives behind us too. And so taking a compassion, why we say that is to take a compassionate lens with yourself. If you have not begun to navigate, what you carry, even in your own body, just specifically off of your lived experiences, if that is something that is new and you're exploring, like that is already a lot, and so to really take your time with what you discover and how you explore, the invitation is to take care of yourself in these uncomfortable spaces. It's not just to override and like inundate yourself with all of this information that's going to overwhelm you, but it's to start to kind of peel back the layers and explore like, what pain and experience might not be fully yours. So that way you get to kind of start to work on your, this comes back to working on your nervous system to change how your nervous system functions differently from your history and your family through somatic practices, through different alternative modalities in the healing arts, right? To be able to support yourself differently than what the previous generations were able to, because yes, now we have this science around what generational trauma is, and then two, the ways to support ourselves physically to start to change some of those discomforts and those anxieties and those experiences that make life harder, but to care for ourselves in that process, because it's not easy,
No.
and other people, what they're dealing with is not easy either.
I think, like highlighting how you said, like, as an adult, I have these anxieties that don't make sense.
Mhm.
And I think back, when was that? Sara Cate and I were having a conversation about how one of my intentions for my immediate future is to like be more intentional about connecting to my ancestors.
Yeah.
And kind of the only place I have is as I've been healing my menstrual cycle. And so I think it's really interesting how she brought up, right? Like saying like, I have these really interesting anxieties about things that like aren't my lived experience, but like I know that it was my grandma's, right? And that recognition, and same thing for me, like me recognizing like, oh, wow, okay, knowing like their medical history like gives me a little bit more insight into like one, because especially as a female in this world, like, okay, I'm not crazy. Awesome. Great. Appreciate
We
that.
need a lot more information telling us that.
But then what can happen, and what she said, like what she was talking about is what can happen is then we get to help ourselves heal more. I don't know what the word is, just better, just have a better and more compassionate, and like really be able to differentiate like, hey, yes, Ashley, like this is something that like this is yours. This might not be yours. However, now you get to have the compassion for why you're feeling like this, for why you might be expressing yourself in certain ways that you don't fully understand. Now you can be supported around that. And so as you move forward then in your healing journey, the more that you spend time with it, the more you're going to recognize, like we said, like the iceberg isn't going to be blown up today. Recognition might happen. And then the more little pieces that fall off, the more understanding comes, the more compassion comes.
Yeah, self-understanding is huge in this. I was just, I do a polar plunge every Wednesday morning.
Yeah, I almost was going to see if I could come this morning. I know, but I needed
my heart just leapt out of my chest. You have to come next week. Anyways, it's really cold.
Moving on.
It was 20 degrees and the water was 21 degrees and it was
Yowza.
chilly, but I was sitting there. We always do a moment of gratitude afterwards. And one of my friends, Mel Milder, who has created this exciting, what is it called? Super Chill Polar Bear Club is what it's called. She was talking about how in listening to our podcast, which was very sweet, how she's learned to observe more. And that I was like, oh my God, that was like Ashley and I's goal.
Yeah.
Like goal achieved. I'm not a video gamer, but I feel like that's something in video games they say. Is that right?
Goal achieved.
Like level up, like okay, whatever. Moving on. I wasn't allowed to play video games. I don't know the language. Oh God, I do that with sports too. So anyways, Mel was talking about how in listening to this podcast, what she's been able to start to understand is that all she really needs to do is start to observe her experiences.
Oh,
I know.
God
and
bless.
It made me so excited because like, especially with what Ashley was just saying, like, let's not, also, I don't know how you blow up an iceberg, but like,
well, I don't know.
I was like thinking about that.
It's like the avalanche, what they do to the avalanches. They like blow it up so that it doesn't.
But like in the ocean?
I don't know, Sara Cate.
All right.
I'm
trying to come up with
I don't know.
Anyway,
whatever.
Doesn't matter. Again, we'll move on. We'll actually get to the content, we promise. So that kind of observation is the first step. It is the first part of this practice. It's just observing what you notice, because there is no way to get to the point that you can differentiate between what is yours, what is someone else's, what is your mom's, what is your dad's, what is your auntie's, what is your great Aunt Bernice's, right? Like there's no way to get there until you just start to make sense of what you feel in your body in any given moment. And that is subtle. And it is actually really simple just to say, I've noticed that my stomach's a little upset right now. before I'm going into this meeting. Or I noticed that I don't really have any saliva in my mouth before I'm going to have this conversation with this person. Or like, perfect example, I had a huge medical bill that I've just been in conversations with the company for a while. And I noticed my resistance to paying this thing, right? And because it was a huge amount, and I was very frustrated with our medical system around it. And so I noticed like I would see the letter sitting there and my whole body would tighten. And I was like, Sarah, this is bothering you, right? And it was just noticing it. It wasn't like I could change it. I'm still going to be bothered by this damn thing, right? And I could say, okay, I know I am tense right now. Clearly that this is bringing this up for me. It's bothering me. So like just even paying attention, because then I didn't have to project that tension onto anything else in my life. I just gave my system that acknowledgement in that moment to say, yeah, you're tense because you don't want to pay this damn bill because you think it's bullshit. And you're frustrated and you're sad and you're mad. All of the things are in that moment, right? And then I didn't have to like carry that tension into session with clients. I didn't have to carry that tension into session, sitting here with Ashley. Like when we give ourselves these little moments just to be with what is happening for us, that's how we start to discover and explore what it is that we need as our own base understanding for ourselves to then start to dig into these pieces and start to create change.
Yeah.
And even that right there, me giving myself permission to be tense is different than what my lived experiences growing up was. That is me doing something different for my nervous system in that moment, is acknowledging what I was feeling and letting it be true and not shaming it and not changing it, but just being like, yeah, I'm reacting to this.
Yeah, totally. And remember when you remember.
Hocus Pocus.
That show.
This episode, man.
So it is, in my opinion, incredibly important that we do this noticing when we feel good. When we feel now, like what Sara Cate's talking about, like with the bill, right? Like it's super frustrating, and she wasn't talking about like some significant trauma, right?
Yeah.
And so it's completely unfair of any healer or for yourself to ask yourself to just notice what you're feeling when like some shit is really going on. It's just unfair, and it can cause some damage, right?
If you don't have that safety net underneath you.
Yes. If you
just feel like you're in the vortex.
Right. Exactly. So what is extremely helpful is if we can find moments of our day where we are just feeling, it could be good. It could be you're feeling neutral. It could be that there's really like nothing significant going on, right? Either way. And that's when you take the deep breaths and you just notice what is going on in your body. And if what you notice is like, I just feel really calm right now. I feel really neutral. I feel really like, oh, actually, I didn't notice I was hungry. I'm going to go eat something, or I'm going to go get a drink of water, or whatever it is. But if we are not helping our body check in when we are feeling good, we're going to have a harder time when we're really working on some of the deeper, more tender things, because our body wants to trust us and our body wants to feel at home. And the way that we feel at home is noticing where we feel comfortable. And so if we notice our bodies and what it feels like when we are quote okay, we're going to get more information. Yeah. It's going to give us a bigger space to land on, to hold us, to support us when we're working through the really tender things.
Yeah. Very well said. That.
Thanks.
Like looking back at even, our family's histories, right? Like there are things that we can look at that maybe it's not your family specifically, if that's a really difficult relationship or those are difficult relationships for you, but even just going to lived experiences in your life that have been supportive, that have been comfortable. thinking about the coach that you really loved or the teacher that you really loved or, that mentor that you had, going to those situations and circumstances if your biological family is not one that has felt safe or supportive for you. And if it has, wonderful, pull from that. Look at your family's history and lineage and be like, God, those are great memories. I love that we've carried that tradition on. I love that we still practice these parts of our culture. Okay. Beautiful. Use those as supports. For me, there are huge misses in my generational kind of understanding and knowing, but there are practices that my family has held in our heritage that I do stand on. And I actually connect into the culture that I come from more than I do sometimes my own biological heritage, because that was kind of disconnected. It wasn't there. And so even pulling from that, and allowing like those that came years and years before me that I never knew, right? Letting their strength hold me up sometimes because they were battling their own stuff back then, right?
Yeah.
Famine and war and all of these things. So being able to give ourselves supports in different ways in order to do this work and in order to start opening up what it is that we do feel in our bodies. Ashley and I will always bring it back to like, I love that she said, your body wants to trust you and it wants to feel at home. And so does our mind and our soul want to feel that as well. And so when those three things, when our mind and our body and our soul can connect, there's an integration that does happen. And that takes time. And that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of compassion. And so we've just dipped our toes into this conversation around generational trauma. And, so again, like Ashley said, notice the times in your body where you feel comfortable and resourced. And then maybe you start to play a little bit with like, oh, I'm a little irritated by that. Or God, I really don't want that for dinner, but that's what I made, right? Maybe it's just those little simple like noticings of the annoyances of everyday life. Oh God, I have to call that person back or I have to do that thing. And maybe you start to explore a little bit just some of your history, right? You start to look at maybe what some of the lived experiences of your ancestors might have been and start to play with what does that maybe tell me a little bit about who I might be today.
I think one of the cool things with that, and you like alluded to it a little bit, is like those bits of ancestral wisdom that we can find. And again, right? Like if this is not something that is true for our immediate nuclear family or like even the generation prior, right? But further up the line, things like, I listened to, and there are a couple of times in my life where I can like hear my mom say, well, I don't know, I did that because grandma did that and that's what her mom did, right? Now, some of those might just be like random things, but what if it's that very specific tea you drink when you feel a very specific way? That is ancestral wisdom and medicine, right? Maybe it's, I don't know what I feel when I'm out in my garden, but there's something connecting me to something deeper in who I am. And maybe your ancestors were really into that. They worked with the earth in their hands and you get to connect that way. Or it's like really, really, really long walks that you find that connection to instead of like a strenuous workout or something like that. Maybe there's some history of your ancestors walking, right? Like, so we get to also, as we move through this, if you're wanting to connect to some of the wisdom that might be there, like Sara Cate said, you get to kind of explore all of it, even if it wasn't a part of your immediate
lived experience.
Yes. Yeah.
And, if you've ever felt drawn to something and you're like, I don't know why, but you just felt this, like, I want to know more about that. I want to look at that more. I want to be near that. Maybe it's a music type. Maybe it's, who knows what's living in your DNA that you haven't maybe yet uncovered or explored. And so like Ashley was kind of saying, there is some wisdom that we can draw, and it doesn't have to be this finite knowledge. It can just be like almost an invitation of, hey, I'm really enjoying this. I'm going to let this be a part of my experience. I'm going to let this support me. That's how anything culturally, it's kind of like when you go and travel to a different place and you see something new, you're like, oh God, that's really cool. Right. and it might resonate with you, and maybe somebody else would see that and it wouldn't resonate with them at all. And just giving permission for your kind of sensory world to be alive and aware of all of the different things that you might never have known were a part of something in your world and in your life. So
Yeah.
giving kind of space to play with this, as much as it can be a really incredible way for us to learn and to heal, it can also be something that brings in some curiosity and play also, right? It doesn't have to be, if your biological family is difficult to navigate, maybe think about the wider experience of who has come before you. Ashley had this really cool thing. Do you want to read that? Of the histories?
Oh yeah, I forgot.
She did,
But it is cool.
Just think about this as like an offering to, if your knit close biological family has been one of difficulty for you, this is actually, there's so much more in you.
So this is from Dr. Muriel Bouquet.
We'll tag her.
And we'll tag her. She has a new book out about this specific thing. She talks about the wisdom in it as well. She gives some really good, she actually talks about deep breathing. And so, you know, I'm a big fan.
I was a fan of breath.
Anyway,
and
I really love her perspective, because she comes from, and she talked about this. She talks about how she finished her schooling, but then went directly into holistic psychology. And so she is like seen as like, you know, the weird girl in her profession, because she came from a place that wasn't fully westernized. And so I appreciate, and just her lived experience is, she's just lovely. Okay, whatever. We're gonna, I'll stop. We'll tag her, check her out. Okay, so she talked about the 7 generations of trauma, what they reflect. Okay, so that is 128 fifth great grandparents who birthed your 64 fourth great grandparents, who birthed your 32 third great grandparents, who birthed your 16 great great grandparents, who birthed your 8 great grandparents, who birthed your 4 grandparents, who birthed your 2 parents, and then they birthed you, right? So taken together, only 7 generations back, you're carrying at least 255 direct histories in you, including your own.
Pretty wild.
Ooh, that gave me goosebumps.
I know.
Every time I think about it.
So
255.
So it isn't just the people that raised you or the people that were your biological parents that you are experiencing in your world. There are opportunities so far outside of them, you know, because I think a lot of people, when they think about this lifetime, if for some reason their caregivers were not supportive, were not attuned, right? Like, it's kind of like, this was my one shot, but that's not true. Maybe some of the strength of those other ancestors that came before you, that knew how to persevere and had a vision for a different life. Maybe that's what's in you. That gives you your perseverance to survive maybe the difficult things that have happened in your life.
Yeah.
So kind of pulling and calling from that wisdom to kind of support you. Next week, we're going to talk about it being a little bit closer to home. So the 2 people who birthed you, who were a part of your inception, kind of what it is to live in that kind of experience of maybe being raised, kind of coming off of last season, talking about the misattuned caregivers. We're going to kind of explore that a little bit more, but to kind of bring the macro of the generational ancestral stuff down into kind of what our lived experience is and how to differentiate a little bit more from our maybe biological family, be it supportive or not. You know, there's ways to really create our own kind of understanding of self outside of that. So stay tuned for that next week.
I just feel really cool right now thinking about the 255.
I know.
Like, who would I kick out? And who would I keep around?
I'm just, I mean,
yeah.
I'm like, how many wise old witches?
That's exactly
We're
right.
so a part of my ancestry.
Yeah. How many Winifred Sanders?
Yo,
are in.
Yeah, there were some dark witches in my life.
Yeah.
Into it.
Woo.
All
Okay,
right,
guys. Hey guys, you might have noticed some audio glitches. We tried to make it as smooth as possible, but there's a couple spots where it just got a little quiet sometimes. So thank you for hanging in there with this episode. Hopefully everything will be fixed next week. And as always, take care of yourselves and we will see you next time.